Good evening, all. I know it's a small group. Thank you for being here, but we aren't going to use the mics just so John is back there recording and he can pick up questions that come up or anything in this presentation. So I'm Roberta Gerson. Welcome. I'm the superintendent of schools here in MSAD 49. And with us this evening, we have Kathy Kogan, who is the project manager of, which we're going to hear about this evening, and Alan Cunningham, who is the Director of Design, and they are part of CHA. So I wanted to, before we open up with this, talk to you a little bit about the history of how we came to this point this evening. And that began in 2012, and I think we have at least one board member that may have been part of that process. In the fall of 2012, the district convened a facilities committee building study, and at the end of that school year, the committee had engaged with a firm to complete a structural survey of Fairfield Primary School, Albion Elementary School, and Clinton Elementary School. That was completed in June 2013. The survey was updated in 2016, and though I wasn't part of that group at the time, I suspect there was a lag in maybe what the DOE was accepting for applications. They weren't open in those intervening times. So the study was updated in 2016. In March of 2017, the district submitted 3 applications for major capital improvement project to the Department of Ed. In the spring of 2018, the DOE published a final priority rank order list of 74 schools. So I'm assuming that 74 applications were submitted, perhaps more. Some were maybe disqualified or whatever it was, but there was a rank order of 74 applications across the state. Among them were 3 applications. They're separate applications submitted by this school district. In 2018, the DOE, once it's published that, notified this school district, and it was public record. Fairfield Primary was listed number 1 on that list of rank order 74. Elementary, Clinton Elementary was listed at 39 and Albion at 58. In December 2018, the district hosted the State Board of Education at Fairfield Primary School as that group convened to decide and approve what essentially the Kendra Mink and the Commissioner of Education had recommended for funding. 3 schools at that time were funded. It was the Fairfield Primary Project, a Skowhegan School, and a Rumford Elementary School project. In the intervening year, so once we were named intervening year, I met with Scott Brown, who is the Director of Major Capital School Construction Programming through the Department of Education. I, with some board members, part of our team, met periodically to look at where do we begin in initiating this process. And one of the first things we needed to do was hire a firm to conduct a feasibility study. So the board created a small search committee, and I think there was 4 members, and we put out an RFP last December and interviewed a whole array of firms, and we made our selection with CHA, and we're very pleased. We hired the firm in March, and they began their work of conducting this feasibility study, which is required by the Department of Education as we proceed with what is essentially and what can be a 100% state-funded project. So in our view, it's a great gift to our school community. We have Fairfield Primary is the only project on the list right now, but the state requires the school unit to review capacity across all their school communities in the elementary buildings. So that is what they've done. They've recently reported to the board. We convened our first building committee, of which we have 6 members of the school board, myself and Scott Washburn, and our personnel from CHA. And from that, we will create many subcommittees. Among them, one of the most important critical ones would be an Ed Program Committee that will carry on the work from conversations started in these 2 public forums. So thank you again for being here. There will be more to follow in the next year and a half to referendum, which is June of 22. We'll be doing all the good and important work of public engagement to determine what our community needs and wants and visions, and the firm's going to help us figure out what those possibilities are and what is a good fit for what our community wants. So thank you. Kathy, Alan.
Okay, I'm good now. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you for coming out. You know, it's a little tricky these days to come to a public meeting, but we also find that face-to-face conversations about these early phases are really important. So we're really glad to have you here, and we hope to provide more opportunities like this, and also alternative opportunities for getting feedback that are virtual or digital in some other fashion. I'm going to go ahead. Oops, I'm holding too many things. So what we wanted to do tonight was 3 things. We wanted to start by sharing with you what we learned about your schools. As Roberta indicated, one of the first things that the Department of Education asked us to do was review all of the documentation that has been done so far on your schools, do some of our own reconnaissance, and then provide a summary report of our findings. So we'll share that information with you to start. And then we wanted to share a little bit about what we're seeing in trends in architecture for schools, so that you can kind of see what we're seeing as the new and exciting genre of education buildings are looking like, and how they're supporting education today. And then the third thing, and the most important thing, is we have a bunch of questions we want to ask you so that we can hear what your opinions are about the future of education in MSAD 49, but also what you would like to see this project turn out to be. So the first thing that I wanted to do is kind of explain to you where we are in the process. As Roberta indicated, we're pretty early on in the process. We're at the start, and over here, step 20 is when construction starts. So we have a long ways to go to get there. And this step over here, oops, right here, is when we go to referendum. So there's quite a bit of work to do between now and when the project would go to the voters for approval. And there's lots of opportunities all along the way to engage the public and make sure that our opinions are heard and suggestions are heard, and that everyone is kept up to date of the progress of the process. But this is a process that's laid out by the Department of Education. It's tried and true. They do it with all of their state-funded projects. So it's something it's a roadmap. We rarely deviate from the roadmap, but it's definitely something that has worked for them over the years and has been successful. So, as Roberta indicated, the first thing we were asked to do is review the existing buildings, the existing elementary schools. We were asked to look at the capacity of the existing schools, the student capacity. We were asked to look at space allocation and utilization. Is it overutilized? Are there too many students in the space, or is it underutilized? Are there too few? Based on what the state uses for standards today. We were also asked to assess the existing systems in the buildings, mechanical, electrical, life safety systems. We were asked to look at whether the buildings currently comply with current codes and what might be required to get them up to current codes. We were asked to look at the ability to expand all of the buildings. So We looked at the site and whether the buildings could be expanded on the site. We also evaluated the structure of the existing buildings and some of the code requirements that would be required in order for us to expand those buildings. And we looked at site layout for each of the buildings in terms of best practices for site circulation and safety on the site. You have to turn yourself on.
Yeah, if I could just add that the Department of Education had us review all the studies and all the documentation that had been done previously. So we kind of had that overview. I know Kathy just mentioned we looked at structural. We didn't do a structural evaluation on all the buildings, but certainly with continued use, that would be one of the things that we'd end up doing with a new versus renovation.
So we looked at Fairfield, and some of the things that we discovered about Fairfield, which a lot of you probably know, but we're going to do a quick tour of the buildings. The original building was built in 1907. It was rebuilt in 1927 after the fire, and an annex was added in the early 50s. It has a lot of accessibility concerns. It's 13 different levels, approximately, with stairs between each of those. The entries are all stairs to get into all of the entries. Lots of the egress requires stairs to get in or to get out of the building. The stairs themselves don't comply with current code requirements, plumbing equipment, etc., that are non-ADA compliant, barrier-free compliant. It does have a sprinkler system, which is good, but it's located on a 1.4 acre lot, so the lot is quite maxed out. That means that there's very little available land to build an expansion on. And additionally, because it's such a small site, it has some safety concerns about site circulation for drop-off and pick-up for parents and busing, etc.
I would say that we also looked at the annex. The annex is part of the elementary school, and that one is not sprinkled.
So then we looked at Albion School. Albion was built in 1952 and had an addition in 1980. It has metal and board and batten siding. The play structures are very well maintained, but they are outdated. There was a water storage treatment reservoir added to the building after there was some concerns about water quality on site. It does not have a sprinkler system. It also needs various ADA and code upgrades to bring it up to code. If it were to be expanded, a full sprinkler system would need to be installed. And the mechanical and electrical systems are outdated. They've exhausted their predicted lifespan. You can see here in this photo, the pink building is the original building built in 1952, and this is the addition here. We looked at Benton. Benton is actually your newer building. Although it was originally built in the 50s, there were additions and substantial renovations done in 1988. There are still some ADA and code upgrades required. It was built just before the ADA was adopted, but asbestos was removed as part of the renovation. The current layout for site circulation and oversight of the main entry to the building does not meet current standard practices for safety. And expansion would be a little bit tricky here because the building, although it's a very sweet design in terms of educational flexibility, it has these little houses of classrooms, and they share a very nice activity space, a flex space. It's a very forward-thinking design and is still used today. However, because of the design of the building, the shape of the building, and its occupancy on the site, it's tricky to add on to. The site is also pretty close to being maxed out, And each of these little houses have sloped roofs, so it's difficult to add on to those. And also there's a mix of construction types, which makes it a little bit tricky for additions as well. This is the original building here, 1958. These were the additions done in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Benton is a solid design, and if taken care of like it has been, it's going to last for years to come. Some of the things that we see, the site circulation, the bus drop-off loop, parent drop-off loop, and visibility to the administrative offices, probably doesn't have the right control that we have set up with today's security, but that can always be accomplished. The other thing with pitched roofs and having younger kids is with the location of the locks, keeping them out away from the roofs is important. It's another safety concern, but otherwise a really solid building with some nice flex spaces in the middle.
Yep. Clinton School, original building was built in the 40s, and then it's been added on to a few times up through the 70s. This building is it also has a number of ADA upgrade issues, so you can see that none of the plumbing fixtures are accessible. There are stairs to get up into bathrooms. There are some concerns in this building about the mechanical systems. Mechanical and electrical systems have lived their lifespan, and there are some concerns about heat and air ventilation in the rooms. A lot of the rooms have space heaters, sort of hardwired to keep the rooms warm.
Yeah, I was going to say, with both Albion and Clinton, the mechanical systems and the amount of ventilation that we're seeing in the schools that was noted in previous reports is not being delivered. We're not getting what we would expect if we were designing a new facility. So that would be one of the things going forward, I think, that we would recommend investing in.
This building does not have a sprinkler system, so any expansion of this building would require a full sprinkler system.
But lots of workarounds. I mean, we've seen, how many times have we seen schools like this where, it's like every community, they start off with a school and then there's multiple additions, and all of a sudden you've got 10 different building types within one complex. So from a facility standpoint, you've got all these different conditions. It's just not one mechanical system. It might be 3 mechanical systems, and there's been lots of workarounds to solve the issues.
Yeah, you can see here that it's been added to on a little bit like a choo-choo train. So the blue is the original building, then the orange was added, then the light pink, then the dark purple, then the dark pink, and then the green.
We're connected to portables and the music rooms and the original addition. You go upstairs and you come downstairs and the music programs are located underneath if you've visited the school. And neither this school nor Albion have 3-phase power, which if we were doing a new facility, we'd automatically have 3-phase power given the programs and just the fact that you're going to have an elevator and a kitchen. So there's sort of some similarities between these two models, if you will.
So one of the other things that the Department of Education requires you to do as a district is to hire a statistician to provide you with a enrollment projection based on all sorts of data, including information they have about businesses coming to the area or housing developments coming to the area, history of life, births,
construction starts.
Constructions, yeah. So they collect all of this data and they do an enrollment projection. And the state likes to look out 10 years from when the project was first approved. So in looking at the 29-2030 school year, it's anticipated that you'll have an enrollment drop of about 100 students. That's not unusual, and actually it's pretty good from what we've seen around the state. But these are the enrollment numbers that the state will use for any future studies about a potential project here. So the other thing that we took a look at is your energy use intensity for each of the buildings. A new building that follows current building codes The energy use intensity would be between 30 and 40. The buildings right now that we're looking at, which is basically it's an assessment of the kilowatt hours per square foot.
We take, instead of looking at the cost of the dollars for utilities, we take all the energy used, electrical, gas, propane, plug load, everything, and convert it to kilowatt hours. And that gives us an indication of how a facility is performing on a square foot basis. And so you can see over there in the right-hand column, as Kathy pointed out, when we do a DOE code-compliant building, we're down in the 30 to 40 EUI range. So immediately you can look at the numbers of what you're spending and see that it's, it's more than double what we would expect out of a new facility. And that directly correlates to how much you're spending on utility costs.
So for the back row, in Albion, the EUI, the energy use intensity is 105. Benton is 83. Clinton is 118. And Fairfield is 72. Fairfield is so low because it has such a compact footprint, right? It's a very it's lots of levels stacked up on top of each other, very nice, small, compact facility.
These are the actual numbers that reflected all your utility bills of what we're seeing and how we look at them from 30,000 feet, if you will. It's hard to compare apples to apples because not all these schools have the same ventilation. Not all these schools have the same heating system. So they don't really, it's not a fair apples to apples comparison. So, but it does paint a picture about how they're performing for sure.
Yeah. We also looked at current operational costs. We worked with Scott to get us those. And again, a new building would come in around $1.20 a square foot for operational costs. Right now, Clinton is running at $2.44. Benton is $1.87, and Albion is $3.73. Quite high operation costs. So, at the end of the day, we were asked by the Department of Education to make a recommendation. And in order for us to make a recommendation, we did a little bit more research and looked at what some of the costs would be and what the costs incurred by the school district would be to maintain these existing buildings. What are the emergency upgrades that need to be made to these buildings in order to maintain them for another 20 plus years? In doing that, we determined that Albion would probably require between $3 and $4 million worth of work in order to replace outdated electrical systems, outdated mechanical systems, and life safety systems, adding a sprinkler system, fire alarm, etc. That does not include ADA upgrades. It does not include any energy efficiency improvements. It's just sort of the basic requirements to get that building to kind of limp along for another 20 years. For Clinton, it was up over $4 million. So it is our recommendation that MSAD 49 not continue to use Fairfield, Clinton, and Albion for educational purposes without significant investment of local dollars to get those buildings to a place where they can continue to serve the district for 20 plus years. Those costs would not be supported by the state. Those costs would be borne by the district. So that's kind of where I just connected my notebook to my sweater here. So that's kind of where we landed. I got it. I freed myself. And that's the recommendation that we made to the school board at the end of last month. So before I move on, are there any questions about that? Any concerns about that? Yes? Yes. The recommendation that we made was to not continue to use these buildings for educational purposes without significant investment in replacing the aging systems. And we estimate that to be, like I said, between $3 and $4 million for, I forget which one, Clinton, I think, Albion first, and then
And then Clinton is a little bit more than that. And those costs that we put together are they're very preliminary. They're what we call the Tier 1 costs. If you went to the Department of Education and applied for revolving renovation funds, they put life safety and ADA up at the top of the list, okay? And you can apply for funds for that kind of work. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at sprinkler systems. We're looking at, in this case, because we know the mechanical and electrical systems are failing, we put those on the list as well. But wouldn't include ADA, wouldn't include finishes, wouldn't include envelope upgrades or roofing analysis. Those are all outside of this. And the Department of Education may have us come back and do more work, and I think Kathy's going to talk a little bit about that in the process.
So then what we wanted to do is talk a little bit about what we're seeing in trends in education. When these buildings were all built, with the exception of Fairfield, although Fairfield is older, so even then, this was the model. This was the school model. What we know about kids today, how they learn, even the biomechanics of small bodies, what we know about them today is that they all learn in different ways, that this is not the best way to learn for every kid. So what we're seeing in classrooms today is a lot more variety in the way that kids can be in the classroom. They can be on the floor, they can be on a beanbag chair, they can be on a wiggly stool. And also we see classrooms moving throughout the day. We see the kids getting up and moving around, we see them moving the furniture around, we see a lot more flexibility in classrooms. And that seems to be more in line with the thinking of how kids actually learn and how their bodies work. We're seeing things like the library is no longer the place where you get shushed all day. It's a more active place. It's a learning commons. It's a place where technology happens, where technology interfaces with Lego and robotics and things that kids can do and learn from by making. We see comfy furniture. We see kids sprawled on the floor on cushions. We see lots of colors. And honestly, we see fewer books. We see a lot more other things that are helping kids to support their learning endeavors.
Yeah, and if I could just interject, one of I think this is the fun part for us. We have a chance to see some of the trends in education. We see a lot of schools around the state, projects that are funded by the Department of Education, as well as other projects in other schools, other educational pedagogies. But one of the trends that's been happening in education over the last 10 years is just the influence of natural daylight. And if you look at your schools and you look at the multiple additions, you can see where they are in time. Because when we had that oil embargo, the first thing we did was we got rid of all the windows and we replaced them with single openings. And research has shown that natural daylight increases learning results. Okay, in the retail industry and the malls, they found that out. So they were the first ones to start to include more daylight because it increased sales. So in education, that has been one of the trends: natural daylight, LED lighting, in a variety of spaces. So.
The variety of spaces becomes really important because research has found that students like to be able to change their environment a little bit, whether they have agency over moving the desks around so that they can scoot closer to their neighbor to work on a project together, or if it means that sometimes the teacher realizes that the kids are no longer paying attention in the space that they're in, and they can take the kids out to a different learning space to just change the environment, change it up a little. We're finding that now in COVID, getting the kids outside helps to change their environment a little bit as well. So one of the things that we're seeing is no longer are we really seeing these sort of very stringent corridors with classrooms on both sides, the cells and bells. What we're seeing more of is corridors that kind of morph into other spaces. We're seeing corridors that, include little breakout spaces or include little reading nooks or little spots for kids to leave the classroom for a minute, go have a meeting with a teacher or a specialist, and then pop back into the classroom. We're seeing places like this where there's a little seating area so that a teacher can have the kids come out onto the seating area, talk to them about something, and then send them off to, go on a scavenger hunt in the playground, or whatever it is, right? It allows a little bit more engaged use of the corridors. We're also seeing a lot more project rooms and maker spaces. So these are spaces that are dedicated not necessarily to a teacher, like a classroom, but more to an event or a process. So we're seeing things like rooms that are stocked with lots of parts and bits that they can make things with, Lego, building materials. We have rooms that are clean and rooms that are dirty. So sometimes we'll have a new school that has one makerspace that's dedicated to robotics, so it's very clean. Another makerspace that's dedicated more to 3D art, so it's very messy. At the Caribou School, the Caribou Pre-K-8 school that just opened, they have a huge innovation lab, and one half of it is the clean half, and the other half is the sort of messy half with the equipment and the materials. And that allows them to the kids to move back and forth between the two spaces depending on what they're doing that day.
I was going to say, as part of those spaces, they have a little kiln room with a dedicated kiln space. They have a little production room, and they're starting to include all those things that are the new age, CNC machines, all the robotics.
I think
they're just setting it up.
That it really supports the sort of the project-based learning trends, the idea that kids learn by doing, learn by making. At the Caribou School, one of the things that was really important to them was they had this innovation lab program at their middle school, and they wanted to be able to expose the younger kids to it because they knew that if they could get the younger kids excited about doing the kinds of things that they were doing in the innovation lab at the middle school, it was a program that could actually be used by teachers all the way down to kindergarten. So they wanted to have this big innovation lab that was centrally located in their building that kids walked by every day, so that the technology and the innovation and the working with your hands and the project-based learning was something that the kids in that school were exposed to every day, all day, every time they walked to the cafeteria, every time they walked to the library or learning commons. They went by this very active space.
Making learning visible is what that's all about, and the movement towards student-centered learning. The other thing is on the Caribou School is that is a school that was entirely funded by the Department of Education for the most part. I would say probably about 96-97% was funded by the Department of Education.
So this idea of making learning visible, like Al said, sometimes it's making sure that there are windows at the right height, like in Caribou, so that the younger kids can see into the space. Sometimes this is a high school project in Topsom where they stacked two different maker spaces on top of each other right in the main lobby. So the lower maker space that you can see into here is a media lab, and the upper space up here is a robotics lab. But it also means showcasing the kids' work on a much more outward-facing manner. So this is an elementary school in Brunswick that we did where every classroom has a bulletin board to showcase the kids' work. So the kids' work is put out and on display outside every classroom. The idea that you're celebrating what the kids are doing and exposing other students in the building to what is happening inside those classrooms. Making sure that the learning doesn't just happen behind the closed door.
And I think one of the themes, especially that shot in the top, the natural daylight, the natural materials, a lot of these elements are natural elements, and they find themselves in the world of biophilic design. And why is that important right now? Is because studies and research have shown it reduces stress. When you can see the outside, when you can see natural products in the environment, it helps reduce stress. So we're seeing a lot of our school clients asking us for more of that connection.
Yeah. So those are some of the themes that we're seeing in current education design. That's something that we think is really exciting. We get excited about that, especially as it supports the things that the teachers and the staff are really trying to do with the students in the district. So now we wanted to move on to some questions that we wanted to ask you. We're going to record any answers that we can get out of you. And I wanted to point out too that there's also an email address that Roberta has set up on the construction website and on the district's website. So if you think of something after you leave or you don't want to speak out tonight, please be sure to seek out that email address and send your ideas and your thoughts to that, because this is something that's really important to us. The next phase in the process here, Roberta alluded to it, that's the phase where the district works to figure out what the education specifications are going to be for the elementary schools here in MSAD 49. So that means that you start to think about how you want to organize the schools, how you want to organize the grades, what you want for special education services, what types of spaces do you want to offer your kids? Do you want to have these kinds of maker spaces and project spaces, or do you want to have big classrooms and small classrooms that you can use depending on what the students are learning and what their focus is and what age group you are talking about? So the first question we wanted to ask was, what excites you about this opportunity for MSAD 49? I think that it is a beautiful opportunity. The state has only released funding for 3 schools. We don't know if they will release any more funding for the other 70-something schools on the list. So this is, it's sort of a golden opportunity, and we're hoping that you have some ideas for what you want that to look like. Does anyone have anything that they want to?
I was going to say, it's almost once in a generation.
Yeah.
The next funding cycle for the Department of Education could be out, who knows where it's going to be now. It could be out there for another 8 years. And it takes us an incredible amount of time to develop the project, then do our drawings, and then bid it. And minimum, it'll be like a 2-year construction schedule, usually, depending upon the size of the project. So it's really about, for us, it's really about the process and getting our communities, engaged and communicating with us. I guess that's the fairest way I can sort of describe that.
Anybody, no thoughts? Yes.
Well, I'm excited for the project because it will bring in blended physical education, but I'm also wondering about the data of how many students there are, what you're looking at for student growth, or even student shrinkage, because we have had that trend of a shrinking population. That doesn't mean that will be reversed, and so we'll have to look at both ends of that.
Yep. That's great.
Can you state that question?
So you're excited about the
blending and flexibility of education.
flexibility of education. I missed the first word, I'm sorry.
Blending.
Blending, okay.
I'm sorry, the masks are killing me with this.
Yeah, sorry.
Blending and flexibility of education and concerns about the shrinkage.
So my question is, a physical facility, physical plan, and it's going to be housing K through 6.
We don't know yet.
Okay.
We don't know the answer to that yet.
And then my question would be,
To that, thank you. A question on that respect would be, would there be collaboration between students within the school, or would it just simply be intra, each grade in its own cell? Or would these be able to, as I say, blend?
Yeah, That's a great question, and we're going to write that one down, because that's a question that the education specifications team will start to address. How will the kids be organized in the district and in a school? Will they be? We've seen it done a bunch of different ways. To your point, we've seen it done where the let's say 7th and 8th grade have one wing. 5th and 6th grade have another wing, et cetera. So like the groups are by grade. We've also seen it done the opposite, where you have a house, you have multiple houses, and in each house are grades K through 5, K through 5, K through 5, K through 5, and they share facilities.
I saw that on one of your presentations that you had online.
Yeah, yep.
That's a great question, and that's exactly what is going to be one of the first steps with the educational specifications, is what is the relationship between your mission and your vision of educating your students and how you want to organize this new school going forward. Just a little story here related to that. On the Caribou Elementary School, we started off with houses, okay, pre-K, K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the upper floors. And now they're thinking that they're going to do grades 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, class 1, 2, 3, 4 in each house, right? Instead of doing all first grade, second grade, third grade, they're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 in each house and integrate those. So there's a sort of more of an integration between the individual grades.
What's interesting about that story too is that when we designed the building, we designed it as if they were going to separate out the grades. But because the classrooms were all very flexible, the furnishings were all very flexible, they are able to completely reevaluate that. And when they moved in, they decided to do it totally differently. And it's going to work, and it will be great. So I think that that idea of flexibility becomes really important because, as we all know, pedagogy trends change and evolve. We've seen lots of, just even in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen changes in the way that education is delivered. So designing a building or a project that accommodates that kind of evolution is something that potentially could be really important for a 50-year, 75-year project, which is hopefully what this is, which is what the state would support. Anybody else excited about anything? We can move on to the next question. Yes?
I'm excited to see the flexible learning because Benton is a beautiful school, but it was created and structure was built so that it could be small class sizes. And because physically it's not really possible, and within budgetary, constraints, the rooms are small compared to the number of kids who are originally supposed to be in there. So I'm really excited that those pictures, the thing you're saying, is going to be giving more room for the kids to be able to learn in different modalities. I think that's great.
I mean, one of the things that we understand about design for education and the way it's trending right now is there needs to be a variety of spaces, and there needs to be flexibility because next year you may have 6 sixth grades and only 3 third grades, right? So there's that physicality, but then there's also just, we need smaller spaces, we need some larger spaces, we need some breakout spaces, and we need some one-on-one spaces. So flexibility in the program, I think, is really important.
Can you write that one down?
Yeah. That is, what's the right way to put that? Great,
Flexibility.
Yeah.
Classroom flexibility.
yeah.
What is the most important thing to you for this project? It could be that you want it down the street from your house. It could be that you want it across town. It could be that you want it to be, pre-KK only. Whatever it is, we're open to all of the things tonight. There's no wrong answer for anything. Nobody knows yet.
I just want to let you know that I would still like to see the towns maintain their educational facilities within the towns, Clinton, Albion, Benton, and Fairfield.
I think it's very important for those neighborhoods to have neighborhood education. But that being said, I do understand the physical impact of that.
Yeah.
So, and as well as the demographics are concerned as well.
Sure.
That's the other impact, which I had spoken to earlier.
Yeah. We hear that a lot, that, you know, the neighborhood schools, the town schools are really important. We've seen school districts address it in different ways. We've seen school districts address it by maintaining separate elementary schools because that's what was important to them, and so they kept that. But we've also seen buildings where there was one building, but the building was designed such that the communities could still be maintained. The smaller communities could still be maintained. And that worked for those districts. So we don't know the answer yet to this conundrum. This is what we'll be exploring together over the next few months. Is what the solution looks like and how do we address the concerns of the communities and still be able to hopefully get a project that is state funded. So then the next question is, what do you like the most about your existing schools? What's your favorite thing about your existing schools? Yes?
So at Benton, we have the library in the center of the school.
Yes.
So all the bottom floor and all of the top floor can see the library.
Yes, so at Benton, the library is the center of the school. It's a double height space, and so everyone on both floors can see into the library. So it becomes the heart of the school.
For other things, you know, for like robotics or whatever would be awesome.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that space too. That space is really great.
That's where I work, so. I love it.
Anything else? Anybody else want to talk about their favorite thing? Okay, what's the least favorite thing about the schools?
Small classrooms.
Small classrooms, yeah. Yeah, that is a challenge at Benton.
And again, it wouldn't be bad, just having a fort
Yeah,
each the way, because when the building was built, there was that change like the next year in funding.
yeah,
And before that, we had titles.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it makes for nice, intimate classroom sizes, but it's not, you lose the flexibility, and they are undersized by state standards. Yeah, they're all about 600 square feet, is that right, Al? The Benton classroom?
617.
600.
Notice that some of them have been opened up into the walls, so you have two of them connected.
Yeah.
That's the only dimensional number. It's sort of with the operable walls, it kind of pushes into the sink, which is not accessible.
Any other least favorite things about the schools? No? What are your fears about this project? Are you afraid it won't pass referendum? Are you afraid it will? Are you afraid of consolidation? What are you afraid of? What do you not want to happen with this project? No fears. I like it. Yeah, you have a fear.
Yeah, so my favorite thing about our school.
Yes.
I think, do I need to? Oh, okay. So my favorite thing about our school is also my least favorite thing about the school. So it's that we are a very small school. So that is one of my favorite things. But on the flip side of that, it also, being such a small school, means that our students don't have access to the same services that some of the students in other schools in the district do.
Yeah.
So that, it's like a favorite, and I love how small it is. I love that everybody knows everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even parents know all of the kids know all of the teachers, so I love that, but it also has negative impacts as well, being as small as we are. One of my fears about the project is if there is a consolidation, that we would lose that small school feel and just be a huge school where, you know, the parents don't know all of the teachers, we don't know all of the students. So if that is the way that we end up going, I would want to make sure that we looked at ways to keep that feel that our schools currently have of being smaller. So
Yeah, that's terrific. All that you just said is terrific. That's important. It's important work that we'll do together. It's also really important information for you to have as a district as you're thinking about how you want to get organized as part of these EdStats. Thank you for that.
I put down small school versus educational equity as being,
Any other fears about the project? Things we're worried about?
which is a huge question, it's probably the most important question. I think one of the most important questions. We've worked with other communities that have the same kind of question. And basically, schools within a school. Making small schools within a school that gave them more identity and more control and more personalization.
Yes.
My other question would be, like, what if you don't get full questions? What does that look like in practice? Because I know that's communication.
Yep. So that's a great one. We'll write that one down. What if the project isn't fully funded? So the process with the Department of Education is, like I said, it's a well-worn path, and they currently are hoping to fully support a project here. There are things that they won't support. They won't support renovation of all of your schools, plus a new building. And there are other things that they don't support. What we find often, and we don't know the answer here yet because we haven't gotten that far with them, but what we find often is that a school is either fully funded by the state, a project is either fully funded by the state, or it's what the state funds is great and perfect and would work really well for that community, but the community wants a little more. The community wants more square footage for whatever reason, a bigger gymnasium, more classrooms, or the school wants more technology, or the school district wants something else. And those little extras are things that the state would ask the local district to fund with a separate bond measure. So, like I said, we don't know what the future here looks like, but the state is hoping to fund a project here. And we have seen projects fully funded by the state, no extra bond, no local bond money. Beautiful, really wonderful, top-notch education facilities.
I just know that that's like a question that the community is going to ask.
That's a good one. I appreciate that.
Biggest question is location.
Yeah. We don't know the answer to that yet either, because we're just getting started. But that is a big endeavor to figure that out. When we have done this in the past, the location is supported by a substantial amount of data. So first we do a lot of research about what's available for a location. Then we look at things like bus routes. We look at densities of populations. We look at how long any child would be on a bus for any of the potential locations. We look for utilities. Preferably, the state would like to find a site that has utilities available to it already. That doesn't preclude certain sites if there are others. If there is a site that's the perfect site, the community backs it, and it doesn't currently have utilities, the state will potentially work with us on it. So there are things that there are lots of there's lots of research we do and lots of data that we bring to the table when we present sites to the community to choose from. But that's going to be a tough one for sure. Yep.
I know with elementary schools, when we go through site selection, I think it's 20 acres plus 1 acre for every 100 students or something like that. So that's the size or the threshold that they would be looking for a site. And in some instances, that's a distinct opportunity to have a new site to, think about master planning it so that you're thinking about going down the road when you do the next addition, which there will be to this facility. So. But it's a process, and some site selection can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months trying to find a site and go through the process with the Department of Education unless something really jumps out.
Anything else anybody's worried about?
That's your word, right? Site selection? Well, you think is the biggest concern.
Finding a site, yeah.
Well, you had mentioned buses and bus routes. There's a shortage of bus drivers. So you really need to consider that as an issue. I think other questions that people in the community might have is what will become of the existing buildings that, if those will no longer be used or declared unusable by the state. And is there any trend to go to multi-story buildings? It looks like everything seems to be 1 to 2 stories, but is that really, you really need to stop there?
So that's a great question. And it's often dictated a little bit by codes and building construction type and costs associated with adding additional floors to a building. But we have done projects that are schools that are 3 stories. We've done schools that are 4 stories. I think was Camden 4 stories.
Camden was 3 stories. Came in at the mid-level, went down, and went up 1 floor, and then the pre-K through 2 was on the level of exit. It's called the level of exit discharge.
Yeah.
But all the other grades would be elevated. Allows you to compact the footprint if you have a small site.
The concern with bus drivers that's a really good point because it's statewide and it's a burden on people who are supposed to be doing something else in the district but get called to drive buses twice a day. So that's definitely something that needs to be thought about is how many bus drivers are actually available and how many bus routes are we trying to run, right? Yeah.
And drivers are at a shortage throughout all the industries.
Yeah.
Truck drivers,
Yeah.
delivery drivers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole issue about busing and having drivers is pretty much the whole state of Maine right now. I know in Portland we've been having a hard time getting bus drivers.
It's a good one.
More questions, concerns, comments? We just want to open it up. Is there anything that we haven't covered here that you'd like to put on the table? Or we're going to do another forum tomorrow night, and we'd love to know, the other questions that we're really not asking here that might capture in a very general sense your thoughts and comments about moving forward.
I want you to expand on what you said about the base. You said 20 acres minimum plus an acre per child or per student?
Per 100 students.
For 100 students?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, that's a little different. So what does that entail for SAD 49? I'm not familiar with the student population.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think what we don't know yet is how many students are we designing for? Are we designing for all of the elementary school age students? And that's something that's going to start to come out as we do education specifications and start thinking about how the community wants to get organized in terms of grade levels. If it's a 300 student building, then we're looking at 21 acres, right? So potentially somewhere between 20 and 30 acres, depending on how many students we're designing for. And that allows, what that looks like is the building plus fairly substantial site circulation for buses and parent drop-off and parking. So we try, one of the things that the state encourages us to do, requires, is to make sure that the traffic circulation on the site is safe. In order to do that, we typically separate out the buses from the parent drop-off and pickup. So those are two separate loops on the site. And then that also allows for playground, soft play space and hard play skates.
Is there an existing site that would
Is
fit
there?
the bill? An existing site that would fit the bill?
We don't know. We don't know yet.
So you don't know what size Clinton has, what size
Fairfield
Benton
and
has.
well, Fairfield is out. Benton is out. Benton is too small. Albion and Clinton, I don't remember off the top of my head the acreage of those two sites.
Right there? Yeah.
4, yeah, so they're quite undersized.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and because the other thing that is addressed in that acreage is current DEP requirements for stormwater treatment. So there has to be areas to treat on-site stormwater from roofs and from the parking area.
Yeah, Albion is 6.25 and Clinton is 5. That's what we found.
Yes,
Does the purchase of land also get funded by the state?
yes, yes, it does. Mhm.
But as Kathy said, when we go through that process, actually, we developed that process with the Department of Education years ago, but it's quite a matrix of all kinds of different criteria, and then we weight it, and so we try to make it as objective as we can related to the project and related to the school.
So I have one more question for you, and that is, what do you think? You know your community better than I do. What do you think are some of the best ways to engage the community and get feedback and collect information from them and make sure that they are feeling heard and participating in the process? This meeting is difficult right now given the COVID situation. Are there other ways that you have seen the community get engaged that you would like to try for this project, or you would recommend we engage? Yes.
Surveys?
Online surveys. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I like that. That works regardless of COVID, because people love to fill out surveys in their slippers on the couch, right? Yes.
I just want to go back to the physical buildings themselves, but how would that work with off-site teaching? Because now we have people who are not attending schools, they're homeschooled, quote unquote.
Remote. Mm-hmm.
So how would that play into the design of the schools? And then that begs the question, why do we need schools anymore?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm watching that trend myself. I suspect, and I know that technology companies are already rethinking how technology participates in the classroom. My husband teaches high school, and right now, when he's teaching his 11 kids in the classroom, he's got a Google Meet going at the same time and is teaching the 7 other kids that are home for that day. And then the next day they swap. So, but every school district is handling it a little bit differently. really interesting to see what the technology starts to look like in the classroom that supports that kind of remote, simultaneous, synchronous remote learning. Because I also know that there are kids that are struggling not being able to be in the classroom, and there are kids who are loving not being in the classroom because they can do their work and sing, they can wiggle, they can get up and walk around when they need to. They are really thriving in that environment because they have more flexibility and more agency over their space and how they can tap their pencil as much as they want, and nobody tells them to stop tapping their pencil, and they can get their work done. So I think there probably will be a long-term evolution in how education is delivered. I think that the flexibility is going to be really important, the possibility that you could do synchronous, asynchronous learning. But I will say that there are studies prior to COVID-19, there were studies that indicated that kids as a whole, students do learn better in person than they do just doing online courses. So I don't think that we're going to see the, vacant schools all over the country. But I do think that we will see more technology that supports the flexibility to have remote learners.
If I could respond to that, I know some of our educational clients, they've been more focused on getting the younger learners in the classroom, that really, with an emphasis on socialization skills than they are the upper grades. So when we had troubles opening up in one school, they said, geez, we got to get the pre-K through first and second grade in there. The 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th are more adaptable to the technology, and they're more flexible, but we got to get the younger grades in there first. So, but that's a good one. We don't know. This is a moving situation for us, and we already see technology starting to change. Every time I think we do a school, the technology has changed. And in that sense, when we do a project, we kind of hold off on the technology, although we do all the thinking, but we hold off on getting it until, because it's such a long process, we want to get the latest and greatest. So there's quite, I guess, dynamic place right now.
And I think, a lot of the stuff that I talked about earlier this evening, the maker spaces, the project-based learning, the learning by doing, that's still something that has to happen in person somehow. So that's, but I think that potentially you might actually see more of that in the schools. You might see more of the delivering, the sort of straight delivering of education happening online, and the doing and the practicing and the making happening in the building. So it may be that we see more maker spaces, more project spaces, more storage, honestly, right, for little parts. Yes.
And another question is, how are you addressing special needs students?
Yeah, so that's another thing that will come about as part of the education specifications is what the special education, the ed specs will start to look at what the special education program looks like in the building, or in the school district rather. And, there are questions to ask and to answer like, will special education be focused and primarily centered in one location, or will it be dispersed among multiple locations? Even within a building, we see trends that are changing the way that special education happens in the building. There are no longer social workers and counselors just in one office next to the nurse. There are social worker offices located throughout the building so that they can be more integrated with the students and the teachers and be part of the daily schedule of kids and staff. We're seeing special education resource rooms distributed throughout schools, throughout the physical buildings, so that these breakout spaces can happen very naturally adjacent to existing classrooms, as opposed to maybe, taking those kids out of a classroom and moving them down to the other end of the building for their resource room time. So those are all questions that we still need to talk about with the school district.
But I think that's a great question too, because it really talks about educational equity and access to services, which you have to get a larger facility. If you're able to integrate those in each house, which we have done and are doing, they all have access to the same kit of parts, so to speak, for the most part.
Yeah. Yes?
One of my concerns with this project is how to show people what's out there for schools now. I mean, I've had the opportunity in this project to tour a half a dozen schools. So just ways that we can show people what is out there in special ed and different things. And it would be just what we don't know that we need. And one of my, I don't know if it's a fear or it's a concern, and I've said this all along, is our kids love our schools. And so we're kind of pulling the sheet back or opening, and showing the facts, the deficiencies that we have in our schools. But it's very necessary. I've been on the building committee since 2012 and been through, like every room in all these schools and see what that we really need. And that would be one of my things, is to have a new school for our students with, like you said, more daylight, more everything.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that this work that we're doing is not at all a criticism of the teachers and the staff that are doing amazing things in the classrooms and in the schools that you currently have. And to your point, the kids love the schools because they love what's happening there, they love the teachers there, they love the community there. But to a point that you made to us last week, 2 weeks ago, if you ask the kids if they could dream up, If I Built a School by Chris Van Dusen, if they could dream up from scratch what they might want for a building, for a school, they'll come up with some ideas that will blow your mind. They're the ones who think about things like, I want my school to have a robotic arm that comes out and scoops me up and brings me into, when I get tired on the playground or whatever, right? They have the crazy ideas that are actually really amazing and cool. So I think that's the beauty of the child's mind versus our jaded grown-up minds, right? And I think that's, to your concern, one of the things that we work really hard to do too is these role model school presentations to show the staff, the teachers, the students, the parents, the communities, what you don't know what you don't know. So we work hard to show you ideas that are out there, that are working, that are things that are being built here in Maine or things that are being built in Ohio or Colorado, to give you some ideas about what could be. And that helps us think about what's possible. And I think that's what I think is the exciting part, and I hope that I'm hoping I bring you all along with my excitement, because I think that's the best part of the process, is getting to think about what can be and then actually building it, because that's what will happen.
Yeah. Your question is, the big picture is also a small picture.
Mm-hmm.
What's included? What does a classroom look like now? What does a day treatment room look like? What does occupational therapy look like? What does a kitchen look like? And I think one of the exciting things for me about doing schools is listening to each community and finding out what's important to them, number one. And number two, bringing our experiences of what we've seen working with the DOE and other schools that really make sense. I know on the Caribou School, for instance, we included some clinic spaces, right? that are part of the nurses' suite associated with it. It's separate from the nurses, but they're in the same administrative area. So there's a pre-K through 8 facility. If you have multiple kids and you want to do an oral exam or you want to do a health checkup, it's one-stop shopping, right? You don't have to go find out where the doctor is or with multiple kids. So it's that kind of like community involvement. That's sort of something we really haven't talked about, but could really be, that's always one of those things that rises to the top of how important our schools are.
So before we depart this evening, again, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. It means so much to us to get to know you and to hear what your concerns are and help us shape this project. But I also wanted to let you know exactly how you can find updates on the project so you can follow along. If you go to the MSAD.org website, down at the bottom is a little button that says School Construction Project. And that will bring you to another page that will be continually updated with more information. So it will have links to presentations, it will have, right now it has the invitation from Roberta for the meetings this week. But it will continue to have information updated on it regularly. So that's a great place to go and get more information and to find out what's happening next and when your next opportunity is to come talk to us and tell us what you think. Yes?
At the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned there was going to be an email address. Would that be possible? I know for me, I have to think about these questions, and as I'm sitting here thinking, I've come up with different answers, but I'd like to have the opportunity to answer them in writing or on an email or whatever, then you would get them, but I need time to think.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and that's why we did that, because we understand that it's hard to think on your feet, and sometimes people don't want to talk in front of everybody. So, Roberta, is there a link to it on the...
There would be a page right where you have that notice that this meeting is occurring, and
These right
the
here?
email address is right here, but also...
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Right.
Questions at msad49.org.
Will you list those questions that you...
Publish all of this, and we talked about getting that fact sheet out.
Yep.
Have this recording available tomorrow evenings, and then, the next steps on some sort of virtual forum, likely, of one of many, but that's where all the information we have. So it's on the tabs right on the inner page.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Outstanding. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We appreciate your time. We know it's hard to make time for this sort of thing, and we really appreciate that you came.
And thank you for being with us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Have a safe evening.